Right, so we'd like to practice using our t-table from our students' t-distribution to find t sub c that we're going to use in our error formula. So one thing that's different about the students' t-distribution is that it depends heavily on your n, on your sample size. So let's look at these four examples. We're looking, what if we want a confidence interval of 95% and our sample size is 6. So this is number 1. So let's see what our t-table looks like. Okay, so here's our table, and there's a lot going on here. So how are we going to read this? So this picture up on the upper left is what we're going to be looking at. We're finding these t values. So our t sub c is going to be this value here. There are 3 green rows here. We only are going to use this bottom one right now. In chapter 9, we'll use the other ones, the one tail and two tail. So where this says C, these are going to be our confidence levels. So 0.5 is 50% confidence level, 0.75, 75% confidence level, etc. This DF stands for degrees of freedom, and this is n minus 1. So this is 1 fewer than the sample size. So let's look back at our first question and see how to use this. So the first one says that your C is 95% and N is 6. So the first thing we're going to need to know is your degrees of freedom. So DF, it says down at the bottom, is N minus 1. So this is 6 minus 1, so this is 5. And let's put this as a decimal point. 950 is 95%. So let's go back to our table. So we're looking at the row that has DF is 5. So this is this last right row, white row here. Now let's look at 0.95 up here. 0.95. So we're looking at this guy right here, 2.571. So 2.571 is going to be our T sub C. We look at 0.95 and our degree of freedom is 5. So T sub C is 2.571. So let's look at what happens if we're looking at the same confidence level, but we're changing our sample size. In number 2, same confidence level, but our sample size is now 20. So our degree of freedom is 19. So let's figure out what our t value is in this case. So we're looking now at the row for 19. Our degree of freedom is 19, and we're still interested in 0.95. We go down to the row, it says 19. Here we go. 2.093. So here we have T sub C is 2.093. Let's look at the next one. Here we have 43 is our sample size. So our degree of freedom is going to be 42. And then we're going to look up what our T sub C is. So if we look at 42, we're going to have to scroll down a little bit to get to 42 is our degree of freedom. And we notice we have 40 and we have 45. So we don't have 42. So which degree of freedom are we going to use? So if you scroll down to the bottom of our table, it tells us. It says, for degrees of freedom not on this table, use the closest one, which is smaller. So the next smaller one I see for if I'm looking at 42 is going to be 40. So I'm looking at the row that has to do with the degree of freedom is 40. And now let's figure out what t I'm going to use. I was still considering 95% confidence level. So we're looking at this column. And so here we are at 2.021. 2.021. So if I look, those first three were all for confidence level is 95%. So let's look what happens as the sample size grows, the degree of freedom grows. So as I go down this column, this sample size is growing. What's happening to our t? Our t's are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay. Let's look at one row. What happens if I'm looking at one row and I'm changing, instead of looking at one column, let's look at one row, and I'm changing my confidence level. As I want to be more and more confident, of course, their interval is going to grow and grow and grow, so you're going further and further from the mean. So here this is less than 1, this is more than 1, 1.5, a little less than 2, more than 2, 2 3/4, 3 3/4, more than 4.5, it gets larger and larger. Okay, let's look at our last example here. We have 75% confidence level, so that will be what decimal? 0.750. And our degree of freedom is 1 fewer than the sample size, so that is 8. So now we want to look to see what would our t sub c be in this case. So we're looking at the row that's 8. Row that's 8. So we're looking at the row that's 8. And in this case, we're looking at 75% confidence level. 1.240. So that's a little illustration of how we can use our t-table. We have many fewer values than we do in our z-table, but we're only using it for the same levels of confidence. So we're still just care about these values for our confidence level. So those are the same as the ones that we care about for our z values. And our z values, we only have our z sub c for these guys. But our z sub c are fixed depending on c. So z sub c only depends on c. But t sub c depends on c and the degree of freedom. So it depends on the sample size as well. Okay, so now you can go back and look at the slides and the videos for the slides themselves.